have mercy, look at how the time goes.
And welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Comin podcast with John Allen. Today, I am speaking with Miss Lori Ann Reinhall. Hi.
Hi, John.
Good day. Good morning, I should say. It's evening in Norway, morning in Seattle.
That's right.
Wow.
9 hours difference.
That's a bit of a time difference.
It is. It's something that we're always dealing with, too, from the west coast of the United States. But it's great to be online with you like this.
Yeah, you know, the wonders of technology. You know, most of these technological things are it's witchcraft and wizardry to me. I get lost in the technology here, but I do appreciate it when it works well and when it makes me able to speak to someone like yourself so many time zones away. But they say the West Coast is the best coast. That's what I think anyway.
Well, I guess I'm biased, but I do like it a lot. I was born in Seattle. So I'm one of the few natives left here.
Well, the West Coast is definitely beautiful. There's some beautiful spots on the East Coast. I was a truck driver for about 18 months when I was finished in the U.S. Marines. I took a job as a truck driver, and I wasn't very often on the West Coast, but I did get out there and see quite a bit of Washington State. What a beautiful state.
Well, it is beautiful, and it's actually a lot like Norway in many ways. We have the mountains, we have the water, we have an archipelago, and I think that's why so many Norwegians and Scandinavians settled here, because they were attracted to the landscape, and they could find work doing things they knew how to do, foresting, fishing.
Yeah, you know, and a lot of Norwegians, when they think of anything American, they think of, you know, like the Dakotas or especially Minnesota, Iowa. But again, yes, there is that Norwegian connection, that Norwegian culture, if you will, in Seattle on the West Coast there. But
it's very strong. Even today, our fishing industry is really run by Norwegian and Norwegian immigrants.
Yeah.
Right out of Seattle.
Interesting.
There's an area called Ballard, which was settled by many Scandinavian immigrants, and it still has a very strong Nordic influence. That's where our National Nordic Museum is located.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's a park called Bergen Place Park, and you see the connection to Norwegian history. Even today, it's quite strong.
So there's probably a lot of people with the last name of Hansen, Olsen.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I love it. Seattle, what a town. You know, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of Seattle is the music. Of course, Jimi Hendrix back in his day was out of Seattle, and then since then in the 90s you got the grunge movement.
Right.
But what is Seattle to you?
Well, I grew up here, so my relationship to it is probably a little deeper than that. I think what I love about Seattle, it's a natural environment. You wake up in the morning and you look at Mount Rainier, which is our equivalent to Mount Fuji, and it's a magic mountain somehow, and it really is one of the most beautiful natural phenomena in the entire world. I think the water is a very important part of our lives here. I mentioned the fishing industry, but there's also the boating that we have here. We have more small boats per capita than anywhere in the world. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, that's also something that we have in common with Norway, I think, where people are out on the sea quite a lot. And I think we have a wonderful university here, the University of Washington, which is really considered to be one of the finest research institutions in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy that we have it here. They're working on a vaccine for COVID-19, and I hope we develop it as quickly as possible, but I hope anyone does as we navigate through this crisis here.
Now, you are the editor-in-chief at the Norwegian American newspaper. How is the COVID situation affecting your job?
Well, it had quite a big impact, of course, when the crisis hit early March. Every morning I get up and I read the newswire out of Norway, the NTP newswire, and all of a sudden our news made a major shift. Most of the stories were COVID-19 stories, and that was important information to message out to our readers, both in print and on the website. We have a special page with updates from the coronavirus in Norway. But it also shifted our editorial calendar quite significantly.
Okay.
Because it was very clear early on that most or nearly all events were being canceled.
Here in Norway.
In Norway, too.
Yeah.
One big issue that we have is the 17th of May edition. It's very important for
Sure.
Norwegian Americans to connect with their heritage at that time. And that entire editorial calendar shifted. We didn't have any live events or parades to cover.
Yeah, and for my non-Norwegian listeners, the 17th of May is their Constitution Day here, so it's quite an important day, and it was quite a different atmosphere here in Norway this year for May 17th. It was different, very different.
It was very different. I think in the end it became very meaningful what people did in Norway and here to celebrate the 17th of May. It seemed to mean even more than ever somehow that we came together somehow virtually. But of course for us at the Norwegian American, it meant following the news very closely, shifting all those stories that we were planning to feature so we could put out a 17th of May issue that really had a lot of meaning for our readers. It filled a gap for many people. It was sad to be able to have the big parade in Seattle. We have the largest 17th of May celebration outside of Norway, right here in Seattle.
Do you really? See, and again, and I believe that is some interesting information for most Norwegians, because again, over here, most people, when they think of the America connection, they're thinking of Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Iowa. And I think a lot of people jump over the Seattle connection, which to me is rather odd. But for some reason...
Yes and no. We're out here in the corner of the country, the Pacific Northwest. I think for a long time, Seattle was kind of best kept secret. I was going to say backwater, but I think best kept secret is a better way of saying it. And
because those Minnesotans are getting a little cocky. They think they have, yeah.
Well, and Seattle really wasn't on the map so much for many Europeans. We're in Washington State, and I noticed when I was younger, when I would travel to Scandinavia to visit my relatives, or later on when I studied in Europe, you'd say, I'm from Washington, and they immediately associate it with Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, which, of course, is on the East Coast, on the other side of the country. And you have to say, no, not that.
Yeah.
The Washington that's right under Canada.
That Washington.
North of California, and sort of place it for them. But since that time, a lot of things have happened in Seattle to put it on the map. Of course, we always had Boeing at that time, after the Second World War. So you could mention Boeing, and that would, make a connection. But now we have so many big companies here that are known worldwide. We're home to Microsoft, for example.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's a brand. That's a company that everyone knows.
Everyone knows. Yeah.
In fact, most people have daily interactions with Microsoft somehow on their computers. Even if they're using a Mac, they're running Office. So that helps people make a connection. We have Amazon, which is, an international company, and Starbucks. A lot of people can relate to a good cup of coffee and say, yes, Starbucks, that's a Seattle company. And there's many, many companies in biotech, and we really are a hub for innovation here in Seattle.
What do you think the reason is for that gathering of all of these large, well-known international companies in Seattle? Why Seattle?
Well, I think it may have something to do with education. As I mentioned, we have this incredible university here, the University of Washington, which is number one in many fields. And our climate, too, is it's kind of Norwegian.
It is. It's quite similar to Bergen in Western Norway.
Very similar to Bergen. It's interesting that Bergen is a sister city to Seattle. They've got the rain and Comin, and I think when you have that kind of climate, people are indoors quite a bit for large parts of the year, and it's kind of a bookish place. People read a lot here in Seattle, so that may have something to do with it. It could just be coincidence. There's not very many Bill Gates that come along, actually, or Allens. So he was born here too, and decided to locate his company here, and it's spun off a lot of other software companies over the decades, and so we're kind of the Silicon Valley of the Pacific Northwest.
So you, as the editor-in-chief of the Norwegian American newspaper, you wake up in the morning and you check the news wire for news coming out of Norway. What is it that catches your eye? What kind of news? What is it that happens here that interests you as an editor-in-chief?
Well, I think there's a number of things that would interest me. Of course, we're really kind of focusing to a certain audience of Norwegian Americans, people who have connections to Norway, but also business people who want to know what's going on in Norway, innovations, maybe any big social issues where we could leverage knowledge or learning. And Norway is also a very, very rich country when it comes to the arts and culture. So anything that I think will grab our readers' attention and really enrich their lives somehow. That's
interesting. You mentioned the arts and culture. As a musician myself, and as a stand-up comedian, I keep my eye on what's happening within the culture world here in Norway, and I think we artists, we performers here in Norway, we're a little spoiled because every year there comes an announcement from the Norwegian government about the raising or the lowering of government funds to support artists, writers, musicians, different stipends and funds that can be put out there. And if I go back, I've been here for almost 20 years, but if I go back to when I was living in the States, I never really heard about any kind of government support. No drastic or vast government support of music and the arts and whatnot. Whereas here in Norway, it's common. That's what they do, and that's what they've been doing for quite some time. Do you think that let me ask you, what do you think is the reason for there not being the same kind of support for artists in America as it is here in Norway?
Well, that's a big question.
It is because
we have support through the National Endowment for the Humanities, and there's been a lot of concern about cuts being made there because they do provide money to major museums and orchestras and artists. And then locally, I know here in Seattle, the city of Seattle has a fund for artists. And
isn't there a shift from a federal funding of the arts? Isn't it been shifted now to the state and local level? That's been my understanding since the current administration came in.
Yes, that is my understanding as well. And right now, here in Seattle, we have a lot of concern about what will happen to support for the arts because of budget crisis that we're facing with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
As well as other issues going on in the city, the civil unrest that we've experienced, the cost of rebuilding the city to some extent. And unfortunately, we also had a major bridge in our city. It has had to be closed, and it will have to be rebuilt for billions and billions of dollars. And it's actually a big crisis for us.
Now, are we talking about a bridge that's been damaged from a storm, or is it just old and in disrepair? What happened to this bridge?
That's being investigated. Looks like there were construction issues with it, but it connects a major part of the city with the city center, and we're just concerned about budget problems in the city right now. The main stress factor is the coronavirus. Unemployment in the state of Washington has skyrocketed during the crisis.
Yeah.
There's other social issues connected to it. So we have a lot of challenges, and unfortunately the arts tend to go first.
Yeah.
In the United States, but there's those of us who are involved in the arts, myself through journalism, but also I have musical interests and I produce concerts.
Do you?
I do, yeah. And so I'm wondering, what will happen. We're all wondering. The support has been quite strong over the past few decades. The city of Seattle donates 1% of its budget to public art, for example. Okay. But I believe the private sectors are going to have to fill the gap.
Well, I don't see any more federal support on the way. It seems like the president has been taking every opportunity to really bash the governor of Washington, and just the entire situation in Seattle is a topic of it seems as if the president is using Seattle as a talking point for all things negative. I would imagine I would imagine when it comes to any kind of federal funding or federal support in anything that Washington State or Seattle specifically needs, it's going to be a trickle-down effect. In other words, when the president seems to have some sort of, I don't know, vendetta or some sort of negative feelings towards the governor, that's not going to help the state when it comes to getting any necessary federal funding.
Right. I think there's been some animosity there, but we're not letting it bother us too much. It's business as usual. We're doing what we think is right. I think the coronavirus crisis has been handled very well in this state compared to many other states. It's hard to say what the various factors are that influence why certain areas are affected worse than others. We were hit early on.
Yes, yeah.
Here in Washington State, and there were some very strong measures put in place to curb the spread.
And people were fairly accepting of those measures, were they not?
In most of the state. Seattle is a large metropolitan area, so you have millions of people living close to each other, and I think we realize the importance of the lockdown and stopping the spread of the virus.
Isn't it amazing how some areas quite readily and easily accept, for example, having to wear a mask, and then you see other areas, other cities and states that are dead set against it. I saw on the news today that, I don't know if you knew, but the mayor of Atlanta had signed an executive order making it mandatory for masks in public in Atlanta. And then immediately the governor of Georgia came in and is suing them in state court to make it illegal for any mayor in Georgia to mandate masks. Very interesting.
It's perplexing.
It's very perplexing.
I think it goes back to our history. This is a country of individualism, but individualism can be confused with public safety somehow. Here in Washington, we've all adopted wearing masks, with a few exceptions. There's been some outliers, but
Sure.
we realize that if this has got to be a collective effort for everyone to participate in this, so we can all stay healthy and carry on and rebuild our economy as well. And it's taking some sacrifices, of course.
Yeah.
But I think here in the Seattle area, we're realizing we have to make these sacrifices for ourselves and for each other. Unfortunately, I think the lack of unified messaging in the country has led to a lot of this dissent. And
and therein lies the greatest difference between the American response to COVID-19 and the Norwegian response. We have a rather unified government body at the top level here in Norway who stuck together when it came to messaging. And when you have that unity from the top, that unity bleeds down to the citizenry.
yes,
And then you take the other side of it and you see that there's chaos at the top in the United States when it comes to the messaging. You know, the White House says this, but the CDC says that.
it's very unfortunate. I will say, though, I think the countries are very different. The societies are structured very differently. The demographics of the countries are different, but it's a huge challenge for us here in the United States right now.
It is. I'm just afraid that people are going to patriot themselves to death back home. I look at it more as a public health issue when it comes to masks and social distancing and whatnot. But then you do have a demographic who doesn't look at it as a public health situation. They look at it as a human rights issue or a question of patriotism or a political statement. And that is the Americanness of that situation that just breaks my heart. To be an expat and I sit here and I see how well things are going here, and then I see how well it is not going back home. It breaks my heart. It really does.
Well, it is very unfortunate that the health crisis has been politicized in the way it has. But I'm still hopeful that we will get through this. There's a lot of good people who are supporting the efforts. What I think is really great about this country is the spirit of volunteerism and philanthropy. That's still very strong. And like I said, in regards to the arts, for example, I do believe that those who are able to will step forth and try to fill the gap.
So you mentioned, I want to go back to the arts again. You mentioned that did you say you produce concerts, or you're a concert arranger, or?
Yes, I participate in them too.
Or are you a musician?
Well, that's kind of a story. I've always been musical. I didn't major in music, but I play the piano and the accordion and sing. And I actually was in an act for a few years with a friend of mine who lived in Norway for 18 years. We performed primarily immigrant music together.
Now, when you say immigrant music, what is an example of immigrant music?
Well, they brought their music with them when they came to America, and some music was written along the journeys, different types of sea shanties. And then when they came to this country in the 1920s, there was Scandinavian American vaudeville genre that developed.
Okay.
And then we also researched songs written about Scandinavian immigrants in Tin Pan Alley, and those can be quite comical.
Wow, interesting.
The naive, blue-eyed.
Yeah, the blue-eyed Ola who just doesn't know anything. Yeah. Interesting.
Holy Yumpin' Yemeni.
Holy Yumpin' Yemeni, yeah.
And there were a number of songs written in nostalgia about the old country. Kan du glömma gamla Norge? Barndomshjemmet. It really is a lot of fun, and it was especially fun for us being the descendants of Scandinavian immigrants to research all of this music. So we went out and toured with that for a number of years and recorded a CD, and really we had a great time doing that.
Did you tour within the state of Washington, or were you regional, national?
Yeah, he was living in Drammen at the time, where you're living now.
Yeah.
And we also had a number of performances in Norway. Probably the most exciting one was at the big American 4th of July celebration in Frogner Park.
Ah, yes, every year, yeah.
Yeah, every year except this past year.
Except for this past, yeah. Now, what time period are we talking about? How long ago was it that you were doing this touring?
2010, 2011.
Okay.
We reunited last year in the Midwest. He's moved back to Indiana, where he's from.
Okay.
But it just really was fun to get out there and meet people and share this music. And I do think the story of the immigration is still very, very important to both Norwegians and Americans, Scandinavian Americans. There's a lot of parallels to be drawn between what's going on in our countries today. It's easy to forget that our grandparents and our parents, to some extent, came to the United States with nothing in many cases. And they were able to build up lives for themselves. And we need to remember that when we look at the immigrants coming to our countries today, that they're facing the same situation that our parents and grandparents.
That's very good to hear you say that. I believe that is a fact that a lot of Norwegians here forget, and then a lot of United States citizens as well forget that they especially the Norwegians who live in the United States now, they cannot forget that maybe one generation ago, they were the foreigner who was struggling. They were the foreigner who had to learn a new language. They were the foreigner that had to find their way in a new land. And it's, I don't know, it's quite interesting to just kind of sit back and see who's pointing their finger and judging without realizing their own history.
Right, and I think with what's going on right now with discussions of white privilege, which definitely exists, even though our ancestors were white, they also faced a lot of prejudices and challenges coming to this country. I recently interviewed someone who was putting on a production of Babette's Feast, the famous story by Isak Dinesen, a theatrical production. And she said it was such a challenge to work with the younger actors because they really didn't understand this tension between the Lutherans and the Roman Catholics.
Yeah.
And it's not so much of an issue in this country today if you're a Catholic or a Protestant.
No.
But it was even 50 years ago.
Yeah, you can. I can remember learning about President Kennedy when he was in the running to be president before he was elected. People just had a conniption because he was a Catholic.
Right,
and we would, and again, we wouldn't think.
Born in 1980 or 1990, you don't have any experience of that. And I remember it. I was a child at the time. I was very, very young at the time, but it was a huge milestone. And
Yeah.
it's the same with our parents. My mother was born in this country. Both of her parents were Swedish. And, you always get the question, well, why didn't they teach you Swedish? And she said, well, they tried in many ways, but she said the pressure to assimilate and to conform was so strong. And there was actually a lot of social pressure not to learn your parents' language. There were even political reasons connected to it after the First World War. It was considered un-American. So they dealt with all kinds of challenges themselves. And I think these are things we have to remember when we look at the challenges that our immigrants face today. In the United States, of course, it's the Latinos. There's here in Seattle, we have a lot of refugees from Somalia and Ethiopia. They face a new set of challenges, but they're not so different from what earlier generations.
Yeah, the struggles of immigrants, it seems to be fairly universal regardless of which country they immigrate to. I guess I look at my own situation as an American in Norway, and the issues that I've had, the confrontations that I've had, the challenges that I've had, nothing has kept me down. I'm doing quite well. Everything is fine. But I look at other immigrants here in Norway who maybe don't come from a Western country, and maybe they've struggled with learning Norwegian. Maybe they have some sort of trauma from war or some sort of abuse in their home country, and then they come here to Norway, and then they meet the same challenges that I've met, and they may not be as capable of overcoming those challenges because they have a certain amount of baggage.
Right.
And then I try to transfer that thought to immigrants in the United States. In other words, I guess it's one thing if someone from Great Britain immigrates to the United States, and it's something else if someone from Somalia or Syria immigrates to the United States. It's a totally different set or actually it may be the same challenges, but again, they may not be equally equipped to handle those challenges depending on where they came from and what their history is there.
That's so true. There's factors of religion, the role of women that they have in their home countries, and the whole new set of rules in their new country. I think it's many challenges an immigrant has to overcome. Yeah. There's the whole challenge of the language as well. I think if you speak English in Norway, you're going to be quite functional from the outset on that level. But learning Norwegian to get over that threshold, to be fluent in the language and feel like you could converse with people without too much effort.
Yeah.
Those are all challenges.
Sure. I've always felt that it's extremely difficult to get to know Norwegians well. And I felt from day one that it was imperative that I learn Norwegian. Of course, most of them speak English, but I wanted to remove anything that could be a hindrance to me, getting the job I want or having the social life that I wanted. And to me, the key to removing all hindrance was learning the language.
I think it's very, very important. Yeah. I'm very interested in language. I studied languages, and I think that it really is your key to understanding a society and a culture.
Yeah.
You'll never really get into it in the same way if you're not fluent in the language.
It makes a difference. It really does. Yeah. How's your Norwegian?
It's quite good. It tends to sound very Swedish, however. Because I'm married to a Swede, and I studied all of the Scandinavian languages. I have my degrees in languages. But the Scandinavian languages are so similar that if you become very fluent in one, it's quite easy to read and understand and even converse. But Swedish, I have to admit, is really my strongest language, and I'm married to a Swede.
Sure, yeah. Now I
love Norwegian, and maybe I should kind of tell a story how I got into that.
Would you please? Yeah.
Well, I've always been around many Norwegian people growing up here in Seattle and in the area I lived in, the whole Ballard community, which I did not live in Ballard, but I lived adjacent to it right across the water. Even in the 1960s, you heard Norwegian spoken in the streets there. It was a wave of immigration in the late 50s or right after the war into the 1960s. And my grandmother's next door neighbor was Norwegian. I was always at her house because I loved her krumkake and her cookies. And so I decided to spend a year abroad when I was a teenager, and I went to a school on the west coast of Sweden outside of Gothenburg. And one reason why I wanted to go to the school was to learn folk music and folk culture. And I had a music teacher there, and her name was Helge Freeman, and she was Norwegian, and she was very proud of it. And she got me singing Edvard Grieg right from the start, and I became very enamored in Grieg's music. I had played Grieg on the piano as a child. In fact, my first recital piece was Elephant Dance by Grieg. And so she said, wow, I've never had a student that loves Edvard Grieg the way you do. And we became such close friends, even though there was this enormous age difference between us. And I felt like she adopted me. I felt very much at home there. We traveled together and kept in touch until she wasn't with us any longer. I was thrilled to go to her 100th birthday.
You said 100th birthday?
100, yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
She lived to be 104 years old. Much my happiness. And have become close friends with the family as well. And she really got me immersed in Norwegian culture. And so I went back and finished my degree in Scandinavian languages and literature at the University of Washington, and also went on to graduate studies at UCLA. So my focus really was on both Swedish and Norwegian literature with a little bit of Danish thrown in. And I will have to admit, I think Ibsen is a much better playwright than Strindberg. So
yes, loyalty. Let me ask you this then. Okay, so you have a educational background in Scandinavian languages
and literature.
And literature. What is it that led you to journalism?
Well, that's an interesting story too. When I was in high school, I was really, really interested in journalism, and I wrote for the high school newspaper. I had an excellent teacher there, and I thought I was just primed to become editor-in-chief of this high school newspaper, and was just in utter shock when I wasn't. This was a long time ago. This was in the early 1970s. And so I went in and I said, what happened? And he said, well, I just don't think this is a good profession for young women.
Oh, you're kidding me.
I'm not kidding.
What a caveman.
And, these were different times that I was naive, and I thought, not a good choice.
Well, how did you take it when he said that to you?
I didn't take it great, but in retrospect, I mean, these days someone would probably be fired for.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Student. So I kind of moved in different directions. I thought, well, I got to the university and I like languages and literature, so I went that route. And I thought, well, I can still. I like words a lot.
Yeah.
My father always said, well, if you're good at writing, if you have a good command of the English language, you're going to do very well in life. And that kind of stuck with me at some
That's very
point.
true. That's very true.
And so I went the literature route. I was really on a track to become a professor. I had taught in teaching assistant positions or even in high school for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I was working on my PhD, and I got the opportunity. Somebody called me up and said, can you work on a project at Microsoft for a couple of weeks? They need someone who's a linguist who understands the structure of the language and syntax and so forth. It was for a product called Microsoft Phone that never released. It was an early speech-to-text application.
Oh, okay. What year was this?
Oh, that was 1995, I believe.
Okay. Wow, I'm just trying to think. Speech to text in 1995.
Yeah,
wow.
It was early on.
Yeah.
And so little did I know that I would go out there for 2 weeks and hang around the place for over 20 years. So I was working, and then a couple weeks later, they got a phone call, and the program manager said, you seem like a very organized person. Would you want to come out and work on the Web Essentials team? And I thought, Web Essentials? I barely know what the internet is.
Yeah.
But it had to do with localization, adapting the programs to other languages. So I thought, I'm not going to pass up an opportunity like that. The job market for academics was sketchy at most at the time, and my parents were getting older, and I thought, well, I don't really know if I want to relocate to another city. So, and it was a great opportunity, so I went and took it. But that's where I ended up. I ended up in web publishing and localization for over 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Vendors that work for Microsoft.
So you got in pretty much at the ground level of some new and innovative technology for.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. And it really was kind of an interesting combination of different skills that I had. I think it was a great career to have. Intensive. I never thought I would be learning coding, for example, which I did learn some coding because you have to be able to talk to the developers and actually go in and manipulate the code sometimes.
Yeah.
So, but it was exciting. It was really exciting, and I still look back, and it's fascinating to me that I got to work on programs like Outlook and Hotmail and the Microsoft Office suite, and then later on MSN products that followed the whole developments of that industry. So it really, really dovetailed into my experience translating as well, and it's quite interesting how everything you learn in life converges.
Well, yeah, exactly, because that is a very steep dive or steep ascension, whatever you want, steep curve from, starting out with this love for Scandinavian languages, and then all of a sudden you're at the ground level at Microsoft.
Yes.
And then from that.
I will add to that, my knowledge of German actually was quite key in getting that job. I also studied the German language kind of by fluke as well. I needed to pass a graduate exam to get my degree. You have to be proficient in several languages to get a humanities degree. So I took a summer course in Austria for a month and ended up staying there for almost 4 years.
Wow, interesting.
And at that time, German was one of the pilot languages at Microsoft. German and Japanese, of course, now they localize it to 40 plus languages. It's amazing. And I heard that recently, by the way, that there's some discussions going on about localizing into Nynorsk.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The Minister of Culture is engaged in discussions with them because it's very important, of course, for Norway that Nynorsk is supported.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you think Nynorsk will ever die out? A lot of people I don't see that it will anytime soon. I mean, people speak what they speak, and people are speaking Nynorsk.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful language.
Mm-hmm.
It's very poetic.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It has a very great literary tradition, and if you go to Western Norway, where I frequently go, or I like to go as much as I can, I know too many people who speak it. And
yeah.
I think they're going to defend it to the very end. And it's important. I mean, that people ask me, like, what is this, Nynorsk? What is this all about? And, you explain the history of it with Ivar Olsen and how it developed during the National Romantic period or became a language.
Yeah.
And it's so rooted in the Norwegian national identity.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I don't see how that would ever die out. And I certainly hope that wouldn't happen. And as I said, I think every new language you learn, be it Nynorsk, or if it's learning Norwegian, if you're an American, or whatever language it might be, it just opens up a whole new perspective on life for you.
Absolutely. You fascinate me. People like you fascinate me. People who can carry so many languages in their head. I seem to have place for two: English and then one more language. I lived in Japan. I was on Okinawa, Japan for a little over 3 years when I was in the United States Marines. And while I was there, I learned Japanese. And then let me go back. Before that, in high school, I learned Spanish, and I was pretty good at it, pretty fluent. But then when I went to Okinawa and started learning Japanese, as I learned Japanese, I lost my Spanish. And then when I came home from Okinawa, Japan, and started working as a police officer in the Chicago area, I picked up my Spanish again, of course, with many, many Latin American people who were in the Chicago area. But as I picked my Spanish up again, I lost my Japanese. And then when I moved to Norway, as I started to learn Norwegian, I lost my Spanish. So it seems like I only have place in my mind for two languages, English and then one more. And I always lose the previous language that I knew.
Well, I suspect if you were to go back to Japan, it would come back to you rather quickly.
I think it's there. When I watch TV and someone says something in Japanese in a film or something, I can pick up on what they're saying. And same thing with Spanish. If I hear Spanish on television or in the streets or whatever, I can start to pick up, some words and phrases, but it just seems like I cannot keep that fluency. As I learn a new language, I lose the old one.
Well,
so you fascinate me.
Well, I guess it just really depends how active you are in keeping it alive. And like I said, I suspect if you were to return to those places, it would come back to you rather quickly.
Yeah. Probably. It's there.
It's there.
Yeah.
It's there, I'm sure. And everybody's different. I think it depends how old you were when you learned a language sometimes, and it can also have to do with attitude towards a language. If you really love something, if you love a culture, you're going to be very motivated to learn the language. And
well, I love being able to speak Norwegian. I think it's a beautiful language. I was fortunate enough to be exposed to 3 different dialects of Norwegian from day one. My father-in-law was from Finnmark. My mother-in-law was from Svelgen in Vestlandet, so she spoke nynorsk. And then my wife spoke pretty much the local Drammen Hurum dialect. So I heard all 3 of these different dialects of Norwegian from day one. And I think that conditioned my ear to pick up on the differences in the dialects and be able to understand them, because I know a lot of Americans get thoroughly confused the minute they come across a new dialect of Norwegian.
Right. And you're musical, and I'm musical as well. I think that helps to some extent, and picking up the harmony and the intonation of the language. I probably should tell you a little bit how I got to the Norwegian American newspaper.
Yeah, we got sidetracked. I wanted to follow your journey and how you got into journalism. So if you could start there. Now you studied it, or you were involved in your school newspaper, and then you got off into this different track, into to Microsoft and whatnot. And then after that, what did you do to get into the journalism field?
Well, I always did a lot of writing, and also in conjunction with the volunteer work that I've done. I have the honor and the pleasure of being the president of the Seattle-Bergen Sister City Association.
Oh.
So I would write articles to promote that. And the Northwest Edvard Grieg Society as well. I'm the vice president of that. And
you're very active.
I started writing articles for the Norwegian American, and then when I thought I would retire from software at age 60, they needed someone to help out on the paper, and I thought, well, that could be fun, and I knew that I had the skill set required to do that, so I came on part-time, and then a few years later now I'm serving as editor-in-chief. So it's really interesting, these different paths that life takes you. And I kind of felt like I did the full circle because I really love what I'm doing right now. And I guess what I love the most about it is all the doors it's opened for me. I get to meet so many interesting people serving in this position. Like I'm talking to you now. I don't know how that would have been possible otherwise.
I was just going to say, I totally understand that there's a big wow factor whenever you get into any kind of journalism. And I know being a podcaster isn't journalism, but it's maybe a distant cousin to journalism. And it's that thing where you get to meet people. I've had so many good experiences talking with people that I otherwise never would have had an opportunity to talk with. And that alone gives such a feeling of accomplishment.
It does, and you make friends as well.
Yeah.
You make friends, colleagues, partners for your endeavors.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to network. I've run into people who have such similar ideas or an interesting background that I can question them about, and then apply those lessons, if you will, to my own life and my own career, and forge my way through life with a little bit more information based upon what I learned from all of these people who have been my guest on the podcast. And I'm sure that's a very similar thing to what you're experiencing in the journalism field.
It is. There's people that reach out to us here at the newspaper because they want their stories covered. So you make a lot of contacts that way. We have an incredible team of many volunteer writers who are very, very talented people, and it's been, an incredible joy to work with them. But also, since this paper has been in existence since 1889 in some form or another, at one time there were hundreds and hundreds of Norwegian papers in North America. It was how the immigrants communicated with one another. It was what held their communities together. But of course, that changed over time. They started learning English, and one by one the papers disappeared. But this one somehow has endured.
You said since 1889.
1889.
Amazing.
It's from a consolidation or an amalgamation of all of these papers that once existed, and now it is the last and only Norwegian American newspaper left in the country. And it covers the entire country as well, with a lot of emphasis on the areas where the immigrants were, like Minnesota, you mentioned, New York, and the West Coast.
Do you feel a certain amount of pressure being the only or the last of these newspapers? Do you feel any pressure to perform? Do you feel any anxiety about that?
I would very much like to see this paper endure. I still think it has an important role to play for Norwegian Americans and their children and grandchildren. I would hate to see their connection to their heritage lost, because I think it's very enriching.
Absolutely.
But also, we have a twofold mission. One is to connect people to their heritage and to enrich them in terms of the customs that they've inherited, the history, and so on and so forth, but also to build a bridge to contemporary Norway, to learn about what's going on in Norway today, because that is a treasure chest of information, ideas. And while, as I mentioned, the societies are quite different, there's a lot that can be learned and a lot that can be shared.
Yeah.
And I do think this paper is very good PR for Norway.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that this paper continues doing what it's doing. It's important for the Americans of Norwegian descent who are there in the United States. But I also think that your newspaper can be a rather strong source of pride for Norwegians here in Norway. Norwegians have this thing where they are quite aware of their position in the world. They're proud to export anything about their culture here. So for them to know that there is a newspaper in the U.S. that is focused on all things Norwegian, I think that's a source of pride for Norwegians over here.
Yes, and I do think it is. I've been so impressed and so amazed when I've reached out to, in many instances, very prominent Norwegians, that they're so willing to give me the time to interview them. They're quite excited about it. I mean, the ambassador to the United States, Kåre Aas, he's been very supportive of us. There's been people at the United Nations who have supported it. I've talked with celebrities like Sissel Kyrkjebø, Leif Ove Ansnes, and they're really excited when they hear about this paper. And, I thought, I'm going to talk to Sissel Kyrkjebø. It's like, of course I want to talk to you. And,
I will love you forever if you could get me a podcast episode with Lars Håvard Haugen from the Hellbillies, the guitarist for the Hellbillies. If you could get him to come on my podcast, you and I will be friends forever.
We'll have to talk about that. I'm so impressed by these people. Of course, I think that it's wonderful that they're so generous to support the paper, but also I just sense that they're so enormously proud of their country.
They are, yeah.
Norway, and it's just a wonderful thing to experience.
It is quite amazing, and we talked a little bit about their 17th of May celebration. That's when you really see how proud Norwegians are of their country. It's not this rabid fireworks and military parade type of patriotism and pride. It's not that. It's something different that is much more controlled, much more subdued, and yet it burns very brightly.
It does.
It's different. It's very Norwegian, and I don't think you're going to see that in any other country. It's very specific to Norway, that type of pride that they have for their nation. I tease them a lot about it. I tease my wife about it. I put it into my stand-up routine, making fun of it. But it really is a beautiful thing to see. It's very unique.
It's fantastic. And I think for Norwegian Americans here in the Seattle area, the 17th of May is just as important as the 4th of July, maybe more.
I would say more so. I would say more so. There is this thing, I don't know, when it's the 4th of July, you have the parade, and after the parade, it seems like, the parade and the fireworks, it seems like that national pride kind of goes away, and you kind of move on to the family aspect with the barbecue and all that kind of stuff. Whereas here, for the 17th of May, there's this upbuilding to it over the last month, the previous month. And then when the 17th of May comes here, it's that national pride is there all day. And it's just, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words. I don't know how to explain it, but I just think it's a much more intense display of national pride here in Norway than there is on the 4th of July.
It's very much a feeling of community, I think, whereas 4th of July, it's a big parade, but then you get together with your individual family.
Yeah.
You get together with your family in Norway as well.
Sure.
There's this sense that we are a people together that is so strong, and it's really quite fascinating.
It is.
And to experience. And I probably should mention, too, the 22nd of July, because this is the day this episode is going to air, from what I understand. And that was, for me, a very terrible day, too. I had just returned from Norway after having performed in Frogner Park for the 4th of July.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in my office over at Microsoft reading that news story. And it really was one of those moments that it felt like 9/11 felt to me, like,
yeah,
can it really be true?
I very much remember where I was and what I was doing, both for 9/11 and then again here in Norway for the 22nd. It's amazing how similar those feelings are.
It is. I would say there are really three major historical events where I felt that way. The first one was when President Kennedy was assassinated. I think anyone alive at that time, even if you were only 6 years old, you remember exactly.
You felt that, yeah.
And it was the same with 9/11 and with the 22nd of July. That's how much I really loved Norway.
Yeah.
It affected me profoundly, and as it did all Norwegians.
Well, Norway lost its innocence. Norway lost that feeling that they had, and I don't know if this feeling was naive, but I guess Norway felt like everyone loved them for their innocence. The things that are happening in other countries aren't going to happen here, and then all of a sudden it did.
Right.
And it was just such a huge loss. It was a loss of life, of course, but also a loss of national innocence.
Right. I think what's important, though, is the resilience and the coming together.
Yeah.
There's always something good that can come out of something. And I look at what's going on in our country right now. We have several crises simultaneously. We have the COVID-19 crisis. We have a huge economic crisis as an offspring. We have the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, which is a manifestation of decades, of centuries of suppression of the Black people, and it's a lot to be going through.
It is
for all of us. But I guess my sense is with the dialogue that's taking place now, with the coming to terms on many levels, that something good is going to come out of this.
Well, I think something good is definitely going to come out of it. I think something good has already come out of it. When I look, when I would watch the protests in the first days and weeks after George Floyd's killing, and I would look out among the protesters, and I saw so many white faces, and that's something that we haven't really seen up until now. So to see that there were so many white people who were out in the streets protesting, showing their allegiance, becoming allies in this movement for racial equality and equal application of the law, equal protection of the law. It was no longer a Black issue. It became a national issue. So already right there, I think we have gained so much good has come out of this already.
And I do believe in the intrinsic good in human beings, that we all want the same thing when you get down to it. We all want to have the feeling that we're safe. We want the feeling that we have the opportunity to build a good life for ourselves and our families and our communities.
We all
have to keep that vision alive and work towards it actively. I think the message that's come out of a lot of this is that we can no longer be passive and just keep the status quo, that we have to keep working towards improvement, towards bettering our society, from the individual level up to the community level, and then to the larger level of a collective society. And then there's the whole question of the world working together. In my own lifetime, I've seen how we've become a global society, and that's something we can't forget, that we're not isolated in how we deal with these issues, that they affect all of us collectively.
Well, what do you say to some of these American citizens who are so against this global cooperation because they see it as a threat to our national identity? What do you say to those people?
I would say we really don't have a choice to not participate in the global community. This is the world that we live in, and
to not participate is to be left behind, I would say.
I would say that too. That we have a responsibility to participate, and it is the world we live in. It's what's going to make us thrive and make us safe.
Yeah.
And secure our future for our children.
Do you think that we have to have a different administration in the White House in order for that positive change to occur?
Well, I try not to get too political. Yes, I do.
Yeah. I try not. Well, see, I'm laughing, but in all seriousness, I try not to get too. I don't even like that word political. I don't know. I guess I can say I don't want to make this my podcast into a political podcast, but I do want to feel free, and I want my guests to feel free to talk about the important things that are happening in their lives, right? And and in these days of COVID-19, in these days of the administration that we have, it is affecting American lives in a way that politics hasn't affected American lives before. So I that was a rather pointed political question that I asked you, but I think is quite relevant considering the times.
Okay.
Considering the times.
What I don't want to see happen is to have dialogue shut down. And that's happening way too much on both sides of the political spectrum.
I love a great discussion. I even like a good argument, but to me, to argue does not mean that there is this hatred and animosity that comes with it.
Right.
To me, an argument is just a thorough discussion where the two parts disagree. And I think that should be okay. But for some reason, most people don't think that's okay. They don't feel like they can discuss, disagree, or argue without throwing insults, without cursing out the other side, without name calling and things like that. Where did that come from? Because that has not been normal for our country.
I don't
This is
really
new.
know. I mean, the worst of it is to even obliterate the other opinion. The most important thing to affect change is it's dialogue, it's discussion, it's problem solving. Whether you're on the left or the right, you've got to listen to each other.
Yeah.
And I mean, this all didn't come out of nowhere. There's a reason why some people have landed on the right and some people landed on the left. And if they don't try to understand each other, we're not going to be able to meet in the middle and move forward.
Well, somehow people got hung up on what is left and what is right, and they forgot about what is right and what is wrong.
That's a great way of putting it.
Somehow that happened. Somehow we got to this point.
Well, it may have something to do with the media, unfortunately, too.
Well, I can remember.
That's why I think working as a journalist, even for a small newspaper like the Norwegian American, I think verifying facts is extremely important.
Yeah.
Maintaining a editorial policy that is not overtly biased towards one side or the other.
Do you guys have a chat section in your newspaper online?
We don't.
Okay, is that because things are so polarized now? You want to avoid any platform where people can start throwing insults back and forth?
I feel that we don't have on our website, we don't really have the capacity to monitor that type of discussion there. We do have a Facebook page where there's a certain amount of discussion that goes on, but what we do have is we have an op-ed section where our readers can contribute their opinions, letters to the editor, and we don't censor them.
Okay, yeah.
Beyond that, they can't contain language that would incite violence or be inappropriate somehow. And
how many staff write?
Discussion going.
I'm sorry, say again?
We want to keep the discussion going.
Sure, absolutely. And I guess if you had an open chat forum that could very quickly lead to minimal discussion and a large amount of trading insults. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important if you have that you have the resources to monitor it, and so that it just doesn't become these flippant insults there. Yeah. Which unfortunately we see a lot of in social media these days. And there has to be fact checking and fairness.
Well, fact checking and fairness. I'd like to see fact checking in the presidential debates when they start up. They're talking about having a fact checker there, present at the debate. That would be interesting.
That would be interesting. I would say that it's important that people get solid information.
I think people have been misled so often for so long that they don't know what the truth is anymore. They hear their favorite politician speak and they just take it in. They don't.
It's a lot to sort through, or as you said, it's easy to put yourself in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
Which is the last thing we need to do if we really want to solve problems and affect change.
Well, speaking of echo, as we were talking earlier, I'm in my studio and there's no echo here. I've got my tapestries and sound panels up.
I think I heard a phone ring here in the background. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Hey, that's okay.
In my home office here right now, but.
Well, listen, Lori Ann, I have enjoyed this little chat with you. I think you have a fantastic newspaper over there. I want to see you guys do well. I think you are a very important resource, both for Norwegian Americans there in the United States, but also for Norwegians here. Let's see what we can do together to help Norwegians here to know what your newspaper is doing over there.
That would be wonderful, and I'd love to hear from them. A lot of our news leads come directly from our region, so let's keep the dialogue open there.
Let's keep the dialogue open. This has been interesting.
Thank you, John Allen. Tusen tack.
Varsågod. Okay, Lori Ann. All right, everybody. Bye.
I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Yes, I am. Yes, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Yes, I am, my Lord. Oh, my Lord. Lord, I'm coming home.